My chat begging that I not be the only one that has a quote in our.
No, no,
Okay,
you asked for
Well,
quotes. I didn't see that. You
I
were
did.
begging.
What I've done is I've started begging.
Oh,
we went-
now I see. So,
We're recording.
We're recording. I mean, I could do it, but
Nope,
just giving everyone a heads up.
we're at 137, so I think any of the
Yeah.
folks that.
Sarah's gonna bring you a printed copy of the updated draft. There is no packet though.
it has hit 70 degrees.
Yay.
It's gonna snow tomorrow.
Naturalization
Whatever.
ceremony is back.
Cool.
We're
I mean,
just-
genuinely, I mean that.
March 18th.
We felt it.
I'm
We
just
felt
not
that,
really
yeah.
mentally out here. All right, go on.
Okay. I'm gonna call this planning committee meeting to order. It is Wednesday, March 11th at 1:37 PM. And the primary, actually only item on our agenda is to do a hopefully final walkthrough, relatively final, I'll say, walkthrough of the proactive rental housing inspection program legislation that was introduced to this council just about a year ago. We last met as a planning committee on September 11th, so 6 months of conversations since, multiple edits, multiple revisions, multiple one-on-one community meetings or resident as well as community member meetings. I think the easiest way to, there aren't a ton of revisions. You'll see in the most recent copy that the updates are in blue because the second updates were in red. There aren't a ton of actual revisions. I'll walk through just a couple of quick things. One, we originally were intending to repeal chapter 265, section 6, the previous 2013 rental registration program that was adopted, and replace it with this at the guidance of Corporation Council. We've opted to make this ordinance a separate chapter within our charter unto itself.
What's the logic of that?
He said it's cleaner. There's no legal logic to it. It's cleaner for,
I don't know how it's cleaner to have a totally duplicative rental registry on the books.
oh, that doesn't mean we're, sorry, that doesn't mean we're not repealing the other rental registry.
Oh, okay, all right.
So
Sorry,
this was-
misunderstood.
No, that's okay. I don't think I explained it well enough. So still repealing the prior, but rather than repealing and replacing in the same section, we're
This is a
repealing and then
different-
adding a new chapter.
Just printed you an agenda. I'm gonna print you the whole one.
How this has I think the way it makes the most sense to walk through is to consider the phases of rollout, the phases of implementation. The phases are identified in the revised version of the ordinance itself. The first we'll call phase one, rental registration and program fee submission. That is covered in sections 6 and 7 in the ordinance itself.
I'm gonna go grab it for you.
And I'll just read for those who are also listening as we chat. So this a rental property would be considered registered with the City of Binghamton when the owner of the property completes and submits a registration form. The registration form must contain the following information: a description of the rental property, including but not limited to the street address and parcel number and address or other description of all rental units and number of beds on the rental property, name and current contact information of the owner, name and addresses of LLCs and LLC members associated with the owner of the rental property. That was a direct request from our current housing attorney, Elizabeth Rousseau. Name and current contact information of the local authorized representative, name, address, and telephone number of the person or entity that a tenant is to contact in order to request repairs, and the contact's business relationship to the owner, the date, location, and type of violations for all rental units on the rental property for which the owner has been cited in the past 3 years, and any other information reasonably required by the city clerk to carry out this chapter. So phase one would be property owners submitting the rental registration and the associated program fee. The effective date, and we're going to get into the weeds on this phase shortly, but the effective date that I'm proposing is January 1st, 2027 for phase one. So it would be 30 days from the effective date for January. So January 31st, 2027. And then after the initial registration, the owner would register each rental unit and pay the proactive rental housing program fee annually within 30 days of January 1st or upon a change of ownership. Before we get back to the program fee that I want to camp out on for a bit, the enforcement mechanism of phase one will be the prohibition on filing a summary proceeding. That's in section 9 of the legislation. But actually, let me just read it since we, again, have folks that are listening. So effective January 31st, 2027, it shall be unlawful for any owner to file a summary proceeding, an eviction proceeding, in Binghamton City Court against a tenant of a rental unit within a rental property that is not registered with the City of Binghamton or for which the proactive rental housing inspection program fee has not been paid. The way that we anticipate enforcing that mechanism, we have 2 options. All of you know that Binghamton City Council passed good cause eviction law last year. Per corporation council, and I met with the Binghamton City Court clerks as well to talk through these options. The good cause eviction law notice that is currently now required as part of submitting eviction petitions can be edited to add essentially a checkbox that says, has the unit been registered with the City of Binghamton as a condition of legal rental as required by this chapter of the city code? The property owner submitting the summary proceeding will be required to check that box. If they don't check that box, it would be up to the judge or a lawyer to identify that the petition is deficient. And that would mean that the case itself would be dismissed. It would be cause for dismissal. So this is how we'd make it a prerequisite to accessing the opportunity to file a summary proceeding. That's a local mechanism. At the state level, if you're familiar with the eviction petitions, either holdover evictions or good cause, both have a clause that states if the property is located in the city of Albany, Newburgh, or Syracuse, the premises has been registered with the city as a condition of legal rental as required by RPAPL 741. There are 3 sections in that real property law section that identify Albany, Newburgh, or Syracuse as requiring registration with the city as a condition of legal rental. Excuse me, I reached out to Senator Webb's office and was told that if Binghamton City Council wants to add to section 7041 of RPAPL, we would simply need to, it would require action from the state legislature. And the best way to initiate that is to pass a resolution requesting that Senator Webb and Assembly Member Lepardo introduce a bill this session to do so. So pretty simple, straightforward process for both. One can be done simply by Corporation Council. The other can be done by a submission, a resolution and submission to our state representatives. Any thoughts on any of that thus far?
I mean, I have a question. We have a question for our corporation council, I guess, whether our local law holds water until the state acts.
There's no reason we can't do both, but that adding as a number 2 or number 5 to the good cause eviction form was Corporation Council's idea. And he believes that that can be done locally. He can have it added and distribute it locally in order to communicate to other law firms and the district that it is to be applied. I like the thought of doing both. Excuse me. I mean, theoretically, in session, depending on how, if we're not going effective until January 2027, it could be passed at the state level before this goes
Right. I mean, I would
into effect.
I would assume that this would get challenged in the landlord tenant proceeding is a state special proceeding, and that there would be objections to the local law interfering with that filing and process without state statute.
I don't think you're wrong. I think it's likely something that attorneys would attempt. I think there would likely be a pushback with that same argument. But it was identified as a legal option for an enforcement mechanism. Any other thoughts on the enforcement mechanism piece, the prohibition on filing a summary proceeding?
I mean, here's a dumb question, but I'll just ask it. What about landlords who are not planning to file summary proceedings? I mean,
Yeah,
presumably there are people who think they're never gonna go to court, so.
Yeah.
They're just. not-
yeah, it's not going to capture everyone
Okay.
as an enforcement mechanism. It's an attempt to enforce and capture more than we would typically capture if we were just hoping that they submit based on the new mandate.
So to that, I would say maybe we can think through an incentive mechanism as well as an enforcement one, right? So like if there's a carrot.
Yep, and that's a little bit further.
Cool.
I will say, so I mentioned the program fee. Currently, it's set at $100 a unit. We had a lot of conversation around that. It's only $8 a unit a month. That feels reasonable. However, we continue to receive multiple requests to reduce that fee. I chatted at length with Councilmember Hotchkiss about this as well, and his recommendation that I'd like to discuss at this table is to reduce the program fee from $100 a unit to $50 a unit, and I'll run through what that potentially means here in a second. Rochester, New York, their certificate of occupancy fees for their 3+ unit buildings start at $100. We have an additional $10 charge for each unit that exceeds 5. Rochester, PA does $50 a unit. Syracuse they have 150 certification that covers 2 units. So I think we can say 75 a unit in that approach. At the $100 a unit, if we estimate, and again, we don't have a solid number, we know it's somewhere between 12,000 and 19,000 rental units. If we take 15,500 units at $100 a unit, that's 1.5 million at 100% compliance. It's 775,000 at 50% compliance, which is about what we got to for the 2013 adopted policy. If we reduce to $50 a unit, that would put us at 775,000 at 100% compliance and 387.5 thousand at 50% compliance. Let me just read Nate's comments so that I'm accurately representing. So he really focused on Rochester. He said they weren't trying to fund the proactive code through the fees, and said that as a municipality, the conversation was around simply budgeting for it appropriately. The fees might supplement the program, but covering all the costs doesn't seem viable. Any thoughts on? I'll say I'm not opposed to reducing to 50. I think we've tried to do as much of this as we can in collaboration with the property owners that have shared feedback.
I think $50 is more reasonable when in line with other municipalities.
I think it's also just from, again, a narrative perspective, representative of listening and incorporating that feedback, which I think if you want to encourage compliance beyond just punitive compliance, it's helpful.
And we did, I mean, we eliminated also based on feedback from a lot of the smaller landlords, we did have a maximum cumulative fee originally in there. And we eliminated that because that is not something that the smaller landlords felt was fair to them. Tom, you had a.
Just in
Yes.
my experience with fees.
Can you sit at the table? So
We didn't do a roll call, did we
Yeah.
even? You're welcome to come.
I wrote
sit.
down a roll call.
You did, okay.
Rather than putting the actual fee in the ordinance, it's as set by.
It's gonna be in the fee schedule.
So that you can modify it without changing the ordinance.
Yep,
Okay.
the language as it stands right now is.
It's something periodically, but
Okay. It's in here. Oh, here we go. Not less than $100 per rental unit, but subject to the city's annual fee schedule.
So it's
So
not
I
less
think
than
we would,
50.
if
but
we were to
subject.
change, it would be not less than 50 per, rental unit, but subject to the city's annual fee schedule. We do still have that performance-based proactive rental housing fee structure in here, where we offer the opportunity for owners that have registered under that 2013, it's technically still in effect. Registered that have under the 2013 section 265.6, that they have a reduced registration fee for the first year That does depend on the number of previous violations, so that's scaled at this point from 100 down to 50 per rental unit, as long as there were no code violations. And then if there were 5 or fewer code violations, the reduction is down to 70 per unit. If we're reducing to 50, do we want to just eliminate
Just
the,
the ones.
okay. Okay,
So in the registration and fee section here. 7 and 8.
mm-hmm.
7 is relying on the owner to have memory and record and all of that, where it's of could be every garbage violation or so, like it's I think that should be a function of the city intake process to
Yeah,
amend the list of violations onto that. I don't think that should be the owner. I
Especially
don't
if there's a
think,
dedicated staff.
and I
person.
don't
That
think we
actually
should,
would be easy.
and I don't think we should, would be easy, and then we're not relying on the
Yeah.
information, it's, yeah.
So I also think the relation or the information from the property owner is unreliable comparatively
Right,
to
so
what we
it's not-
have internally.
Yeah.
So the city clerk and whoever this person is doing intake would look up the property in Municity, and I would generate a report. And actually, we can talk about this offline during implementation. I'd like to build a custom report
mhm.
for this purpose
Sure.
specifically. But
Alright.
that's doable.
Also not wild about 8, I don't like adding catch-alls. We can just ask you for anything else you would want to, I know, I don't.
I think the reason that 8 makes sense to me is because it's so new that rather than going back through to, like, we're gonna learn along the way.
And I think the proper way is then to amend the law. And not have a catch-all stuck in there forever, because it leads to problems.
Okay, what are others' thoughts on that?
Open
Indifference?
to, yeah,
Open to it? Okay. I'll review with Corporation Council.
Yeah.
Okay,
I have a question about the fee.
Yep.
Did you discuss with council? Going back to the idea of like funding the program with the fees, like vacant property. Like all that money just went into the general fund, and when I inquired about that, it was like, could we dedicate this? It was like. Under the current legal structure, it had to go into the general fund, and then it was up to you as the council to put it in the budget. To put money in the budget for whatever purpose we wanted. But what ended up happening was that money never migrated back to additional staff, salary increases, service expansion. So that would just be a cautionary from me.
I have, and I mean, I have that from our September notes. I have it in here to continue to take a look at. I think so much of, so phase 1 and 2 theoretically, not that this is directly to your point, phase 1 and 2 theoretically, at the expressed request of the supervisor of code, eliminates just about all of the burden from the code office and houses it in their administrative functions. So it houses it in the clerk's office. I've not yet moved. I know Councilmember Hotchkiss has had a couple of conversations. He is much better versed in the vacant property law and list and management than I am. So I have it in my notes as something to get into. I just don't.
No, I'm just gonna say quickly, the question is if we can, and this came up during budget season, maybe Councilmember Kavanaugh remembers. Earmarking a fee to a specific budget line so that it can't be rerouted to whoever decides that money should go toward. Because right now what happens, even with like clerk's fees, but every department that collects fees, all those fees either generally go into the general fund. And then they are distributed per whatever's approved in the budget during budget season. With vacant properties, like millions of dollars were allegedly going to go back into one channel and then didn't. And we've had an issue with earmarking fees before. We have the same problem with the dog shelter. The money we collect from dog fees is supposed to pay the dog shelter. And it's not earmarked. And every year we have this discussion of where's the money for the dog.
So it's much simpler, the question is much simpler than I initially was
Can we tag the money?
considering it simply
Well,
earmarking.
I mean,
for-
the other approach would be to look at like the, especially if we're doing the reduced fees and it's not gonna actually cover the full cost of the program. Conceivably, you take a model like the modern version of the refuse fund, where you have certain elements paid out of taxes, right? So the union guys, the trucks and all of that, and then you have the tipping fees that are paid out of an enterprise fund that is paid for by the revenue from the
But
blue
this is
bags.
not an enterprise fund.
No, but I'm
There are
saying you could,
restrictions on what the city can create as an enterprise fund.
okay, so you couldn't create an
Not-
enterprise fund
I
out of,
mean, don't say no, there are,
because I was just thinking like that, in that case, like. They figured out a way to. Divide up the full cost into tax paid stuff, but also have a fee that has to keep up with some elements of the rising costs.
my general take on this sort of thing is that a dollar coming to city revenue is a dollar coming into city revenue. And when you start earmarking things into a bunch of little boxes, it makes overall budgeting more difficult. Because what if, just to use the example on the table here, what if dog licensing fees don't cover the dog shelter expenses 1 year? And we have a surplus over in the rental registry fund,
So I think then the question becomes, is there a legal mechanism rather than a budgetary mechanism that can ensure that that the money collected is in some way rerouted to? Because I agree with you, Councilmember Kavanaugh, like you don't want to, but there is like the risk of defund. What ends up happening is programs like this or laws like this don't get enforced or they get entirely defunded, like off the vacant property list.
Mhm.
Because the money never goes back to funding the very staff and resources that are needed to make the program function, right?
Mhm.
So it's like,
The
Yeah.
first, so phase one, if we look at implementation, excuse me, phase one only requires, or at least what I'm proposing, is a full-time clerk position to perform that administrative function. We currently have funding in our contingency account to cover I'm anticipating Q3 of this year, hire for that full-time position. And that would allow Q3, Q4 to acclimate that individual, develop some of the protocol, finalize aspects of the rental registration form, develop the queries, the new reports that'll be applied, all of those things. But in terms of budget considerations, we already have funding in our contingency account that we reserved that could be used for this purpose.
Well, the money moving, and so sure, there's money physically there. It's gonna be a matter of creating this civil service position and getting it through the Civil Service Commission and making it exist. Which could be challenging, even though it's 2 quarters off.
Mm-hmm.
One other comment about fees. And not to jump ahead, but under penalties, it's $1,000 for each day. And my comment that I was going to share was that in our experience with vacant property and snow and ice removal, but we talked about this before, but rather than the fact, because just looking at that, I can hear landlords getting a reduced fine from judges, like a judge would set that fine.
They already are. Nobody gets
But
the,
if it's a fee, so if it's a fee. Let's say $50 per inspection, and you compel whoever's doing the inspection to like go daily to that house and just post a picture to prove they're there. The code people already know how to do that. And then it's just like a fee and it rolls to taxes. You don't have to go to court to collect that money. Just like bill the people, and if they don't pay it, it rolls to taxes. And that was really effective. with
So for
landlords.
C then, under penalties.
A reinspection.
So there is already a reinspection
Yeah.
fee. And that is also $50. So there's that fee written into the ordinance and then penalty in that, so 15C, the city of Binghamton, rather than going to court, the city of Binghamton may collect any judgment, fee, cost, or charge, including any fee, late charges, or interest that is incurred under this chapter that has not been paid within 45 days of notice. That's that levy piece. Payments not made within 6 months will be levied to the tax bill of the rental property. So that's in here.
Right.
One of the corporation counsel was checking on the levy piece. I didn't quite understand why, but something pinged for him. So he's checking on the levy piece.
Okay.
But that is all in here. But you're absolutely right as far as there's no landlord that's getting that $1,000 for each day. It's already written in code. Nobody's getting that. It's all up to the judge's discretion.
Right.
So this leaves some room for both.
Thank you.
Yeah. So to me, Robert, to your point, creating a civil service position, getting it through civil service, to me, that's just another reason to pass this as soon as possible.
I'm just pointing out, speed bumps.
Yeah, no, I think that's why we're having the conversation. So I appreciate the speed bump highlighting. So theoretically, if it does go through, we bring that person on, have them ready to go with that January 1 effective 2027 effective date. Then we begin receiving the rental registration forms and processing the fees that come in, and start to build the capacity into the budget to begin to expand. Are we ready to go to phase 2, or is there more on phase 1 that we want to spend some time on?
I had a question about how you're gonna educate tenants.
Yep.
And I had 3 categories. I had student housing, county subsidized housing that's not inspected, because I know you had that part in there.
Mhm.
And also the realty community.
Mhm.
That was one thing that, again, in my previous experience with rental registration, there really wasn't sufficient infrastructure within City Hall to get that message out effectively enough. That people legitimately could say, I had no idea this was possible.
Yeah, and again, I'll nod to passing this as soon as possible. So we have the rest of the year to do that community engagement. I think you're spot on with those target audiences. I think what we learned from adopting good cause eviction law, the real estate community is going to be pretty in tune. The larger realtors certainly, and landlords. But I think when it comes to tenants, I think there would be a partnership with the grassroots organizations that are already engaging regularly with tenants, whether it's legal aid and legal services or the Binghamton Tenants Union. I think that's an opportunity. I think and we did a bit of a marketing campaign, or tried to, with good cause as well. Similar to, there's nothing stopping us from doing a couple of education sessions targeted to those different audiences. So it's, the sooner our final version moves forward, the more time we'll have to talk through it, to host multiple meetings. At the Corporation Council, one thing too that we've seen and we expected was an inconsistency in how the judges are treating good cause law, and so I think, I mean, corporation counsel can assist in those conversations as far as advising the district, the judicial district, on its application, but Binghamton Tenants Union's Court Watch program is also doing some of that work too, when they're catching those inconsistencies. So I think we have more of a network now, apps, certainly more than we had in 2013. You know, it'll be a learning curve, but my hope is that very, very, very few landlords would be able to say they had no idea.
And one other question about the LLC,
Mhm.
where it asks them to list the members of the LLC. But I would ask the council if you could compel them to give you a copy of their LLC document. Because I could foresee where less reputable landlords may just put down the name of the LLC and the officer of record that's there, which is very often very different. And that has to do with the service, and that's the context I would raise that discussion. It's like, it's a complaint that the vacant property officers made about why there aren't as many properties registered, because you can't locate the appropriate person for service. So
Okay. Thank you.
I wanted to ask about the exception for stuff that's inspected by for other reasons. Like you might have a unit in a building that has a Section 8 tenant, and therefore that unit is getting inspected by whoever's administering the Section 8 program.
Mhm.
But the rest of the building would be. Is this a carve out we have to have? Like,
It's not a carve out we have to have, it's a common carve out in legislation like this. So right now, our exemptions are state licensed hospital, hospice, community care facilities, or nursing homes, convent, monastery, other facility occupied exclusively by members of religious order, on-campus fraternity or sorority house, on-campus housing accommodations, owned or operated by the institution. And then B is rental units that are owned, operated by, or receive funding or subsidies from federal, state, or local government entities and are inspected by the government entity at least once every 5 years. This one's not my favorite. It's just that it's common. I think one of the things that we've worked very closely with Binghamton Housing Authority tenants. They would fall into this exclusion, but they've persistently reported conditions, concerns. Same with a handful of other heavily subsidized nonprofits. And so I think and I don't know, Robert, that I've thought through if we're talking tenant-based rental assistance and you've either got a voucher or someone that has rapid rehousing, when one is excluded and the other isn't.
yeah, that's more what I was thinking rather than a whole building that is subsidized, the situation we have. I don't know.
Okay, so kind of how to approach the tenant-based subsidy.
And the other issue as far as overlapping inspections is going to be the lead registry rolling out. However, that's going to
I'll reach back out to them. I mean, it has been at least 6 months since I've reached out to them and they have started moving forward. So, I mean, they, in the very beginning, when this was introduced, were all about collaborating. But the final comments hadn't come in to even establish the final ruling for their legislation. So I'll reach back out. I think there's absolutely, and they're well funded. So I think there's a way to collaborate. I just don't know.
Because that starts being annoying and burdensome on landlords and tenants. Like we just had a freaking lead registry inspection, and now we're gonna have to have a rental registry inspection for the city. Can't you government people get it together? It's like,
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there are only 2 zip codes that are impacted by the county-led program.
A lot of
but-
rental.
I agree. It's not a full city issue, but I agree that there's room to collaborate and reduce that burden.
So the corollary to what you just said, Robert, is at one point before Mayor David became mayor, we had a memorandum of understanding with social services in the county in general that allowed municipal employees, certain municipal employees, to access county databases without having to say mommy may. It was like a direct account, so it was a vetted account. And there are mechanisms to protect secure data or whatever at the county level, and the same thing with ours. But one other comment I wanted to make was like, all of us are canvassing these rental properties, but nobody's like consolidating it in a vetted way to know how many rental properties we really have.
Yeah.
And that could be done through the county planning department. They've been very
Reassessment will also
collaborative,
help.
but-
Reassessment will also help with that.
Yeah, but I don't even know that social services, for example, shares data with the planning department or with the assessment.
The only way, so we talked about this during Safe Housing Task Force conversation in 2018.
Right.
And
Yeah,
thank you for that chuckle. Essentially, the communication that was landed on was a very like hard copy, and it was related specifically to Spiegel Act, between code but I know that DSS is still acting on those on Spiegel law at like using information from code, but I'm not sure how consistent or how comprehensive. DSS, I think right now what DSS is gearing up for, they've pretty typically been on board for anything that's, I mean, they know that they have their vendor list of the worst landlords in the county, who are willing to take DSS payments. They know that that's a flawed system, but they've never had the staff to do the pre-occupancy inspections. I think right now, what they're gearing up for capacity-wise is that the state is, right now it's still public comment period till the end of this month, but is about to require services to be rendered to individuals and families in hotels for emergency shelter, the same way that services are rendered at shelter facilities. So I know capacity-wise, they're gearing up for that, but in those conversations, there's certainly I think it feels like to me that I'll start with the county-led program, kick back to where does that MOU still exist? Is it still functioning? If not, can we get back to it? That conversation. And then DSS is also, I don't know how much of this is public yet, but they're also pursuing some better tracking, data entry and tracking systems.
so one last thing about
Yeah.
what you just said. So just so everyone knows, unless something has changed, commercial properties were inspected by the fire department in terms of code enforcement. Although when you bring hotels in, there's kind of an overlap there too, because they're inspecting the hotels under what we'd call conventional or traditional model, not necessarily as emergency housing for homeless people, but tourists or whatever. So they should be part of the conversation at some point, if they haven't been already. Just it's another source of feedback about like where people are living and as tenants rather than as homeowners or whatever.
Okay. Anything else on phase 1?
Well, in the discussing about education and community relations, a common thing that we've seen across many cities is having a landlord tenant. Commission, board, advisory. That. Hey. Something that. At some point, we should be trying to probably discuss having.
Yeah, well, and I mean, this is a little bit lower in the notes that I have, but I think there's a rent escrow remedy to phase 3, the like final rollout and implementation for compliance, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So we're talking about the full-time code position, clerk position, we're talking about administrative inspectors, likely additional code enforcement officers as we gear up for phase 3. But then I think anything that we do tenant engagement wise, which would be connected to that rent escrow remedy, should have oversight too. And if we had a position, it would be CDBG eligible if it's tenant outreach and engagement focused, which could lend to that kind of that position overseeing something like CDAC but it's a landlord tenant thing. But that's a little bit later in my notes, but that was just me agreeing with what you were saying.
It came up when we were talking about good cause and stuff. That they seem to be functioning well with other places. I think New Paltz was one of the ones that I had a discussion with. And they were able to resolve problems outside of the courts ahead of time by making sure people understood on both sides what was going on, and they were able to provide feedback and are in touch with the council and the mayor's office about things relating to housing. So there's kind of people that can communicate outward as well as provide insight that are in for the whole process, and kind of a place where people can resolve things kindly.
Mm-hmm.
Another comment that I might have shared with you previously, but to discuss with Corporation Council that came up in the first time we tried to do rental registration was out of, let's say, 13,000 units, 4,000 of those units were illegal conversions, either by zoning law or by failure to get a permit, or both. And so one issue that came up from the landlord community at that time was like, you want me to tell you I broke the law, and I'm not going to do that. So was kind of pushback, and I just don't know if it has to be in the ordinance, but that's going to be, I think, like if you look at the assessment records, which I know you're trying to change those too, but many of the inventory descriptions are grossly inaccurate, and it's really difficult to untangle that. Like say, show me where you got a permit, or I can think of a number of major student housing projects where they got a permit, they had design plans, they built the property, but they never got a certificate of occupancy. And they've been renting for years now, but
decades in some cases.
Yes.
Maybe there's an amnesty program.
Well, I don't know if you want to do that because that's a pretty important document, but it's like, why didn't we get it? And where is it?
Well, not amnesty from having it, but from punitive response.
Oh, well, yeah.
Right, so it's like, if you come forward and we
Well, actually,
identify
that
gaps.
did come up in a discussion.
I mean, so ideally, if you're having a code enforcement inspection, you would be able to get a CO
Yeah, so
after that.
yes.
Yeah.
The certificate of occupancy is basically happens when you get a permit to establish a literal occupancy in a building. A certificate of compliance is just if like you're replacing a bathroom or you're remodeling a kitchen. So it's the smaller unit, but the occupancy, like if you went to 20 Holly Street and you asked them for a certificate of occupancy, they would produce it without a problem. It's an example.
That's not how I would check that assumption with Dave Watson, because that's not how I understand code to be operating for COOs right now.
I'm just
No, it's actually important because a lot of people call to get a COO and are told
And
that it's
we-
not happening unless they're converting their property from one type of property to another. And to affirm that it's,
You can't have one if you don't have a
I'm
permit.
just throwing it out there that we should, like, I think another piece of this, sorry, just to throw out, I think this is more relevant to phase two, but like the phase one person will need to know this. I think aligning in understanding of all of these terms
Mhm.
relevant to code and how they might be in the state code versus how they're implemented in practice within our own code and our own code department is going to be a really important part of normalizing an implementation.
Yeah.
And I say this having done FOIL work, right,
Sure.
where my understanding of some of these terms and how they're represented in NOVs and code reports is very different. So I think finding some alignment there is actually gonna be very important. And the same is true for landlords, right, because I think there's some misalignment maybe in what compliance.
Mhm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to like
No,
take that off track, but it's like.
it's a the certificate of occupancy associated with a permit is a very narrow legal definition. It's different than what landlords would say, I want to get a certificate that says it's okay for me to rent my apartment, it's code compliant.
I'm trying to remember when we were in
And that's
Rochester.
Yeah.
They were a city that did it as both, right? They did it differently than other people that had rental registry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Because they felt like the banks understood it better.
That
If
makes
you do it that way, but then their certificate of occupancy expires
Every, 3
And-
years.
every 3 years.
Which
they
is
get-
totally different than.
Which is- Yeah, which is how the mechanism for getting the re-inspections is that document expires, which has impacts on the bank.
That's interesting.
That's their model instead of doing a rental registry or.
Yeah, they don't call it a rental registry, it's a,
It's a renewable certificate of occupancy every 3 years.
yeah,
So that would trigger what I think, Rebecca, we talked about before the meeting, which is like, that's a more restrictive local code or it modifies.
Yeah.
You have to have the state approve that. That also requires state legislation.
but. But yeah, so my understanding is because it has that interaction with the banks and stuff, then they can't get like
Sure.
mortgages or loan, like different things
Sure.
can't happen without them following the correct process. So yeah. But they explained to us that basically no one else does it that way.
Mhm.
That's a Rochester thing.
Can we talk about phase two since we're delving into inspection and those pieces? So phase two is the administrative inspection piece. We spent quite a bit of this, quite a bit of our September meeting discussing what this would look like. And that administrative inspection piece would be scheduled after the initial rollout. It would be scheduled within 30 days of the submission of the rental registration form. When we're talking about the initial implementation, we have 2027 to process and file the rental registration forms and fees. Starting January 2028, the administrative inspection, which is that on-street partial exterior inspection, would start to be scheduled. We can do an order in which they were received. But that would, the inspections would start January 2028. So phase two, January 2028, would be starting to schedule those administrative inspections. We originally estimated for all of this 4 additional code enforcement officers for full inspections within 3 years. I think, although this is up for conversation, certainly, and those with more expertise than I, but I think starting, at least planning to start with 2 administrative inspectors. So looking at January 2028, similar to whether we hire Q3, Q4 2027.
And is that a type of position that already? I mean, obviously it doesn't exist here, but exists within the state. It's something that we can get, like with the civil service stuff, that's like a thing. administrative inspectors.
Tom, do you know the answer to that question? Because we
There-
based this
There was a
approach.
code title that wasn't a code inspector per
Mhm.
se. I don't remember what it was called.
Cause it's someone, these would be positions with less credentials than
Right.
we
They don't.
hire for code.
Yeah,
Or differently credentialed,
yeah, but I don't know if that position's still there,
I mean, they rarely get rid of them, they just kind of float around until we need them again, yeah.
what's
It
that?
just takes some digging.
Unused title.
Oh, yeah.
We could ask the director of personnel.
I think that it calls attention that, and this is where, like, if you are looking at civil service, there's inspections that come out of like the housing world in the state. And then there's inspections in the social services sense of housing. And then there's, that comes out of the like buildings and construction world, which is what, as I've said too many times, that's really what the code that department enforces. It's really just build it. How do you build it? And the property maintenance is a very marginal part of that. So you might find, like, in the kind of HUD world, a title that's more appropriate, because this administrative inspection is really gonna go, as I understand it from talking to you, Rebecca, it's like they can flag things, but if they're flagging like property maintenance, New York State law violation, that system's already in place. It just gets a
Right.
referral to code and it goes away by, it goes in its own thing and it will end up in court if it's a real violation. The administrative inspector is just verifying the property is registered and it appears to be in general conformance. So like health and safety, that allows you to bring in things like lead and other quality of life issues that are not at all part of the property maintenance. Well, as much as we've tried to change that, we don't want to touch that.
Yeah,
Because that takes you to court, and taking you to court takes time, and you'll lose control of everything, because it's like, it beats the purpose. That makes sense.
yep. What were you gonna say, remember?
It's basically getting eyeballs on everything.
Yeah.
Consistently,
Right,
in a consistent manner, say, hey. Broken windows, broken stairs,
Right.
giant hole in foundation, giant hole in roof, like the obvious
Right.
stuff.
it's developed,
Garbage
and
around
the
property
concept,
that's like, you know,
right,
right
the
there at once.
the concept for the administrative inspection and inspector is as this phase two. Primarily to accommodate rollout initially, but then ongoing, it makes sense as well. We identify categories. And the lowest category, the highest number of deficiencies noted, those get referred to code first for the full interior inspection. I think that's the only way that we not only accommodate the rollout, but make sure that we're targeting the worst properties first, which has been our really consistently the goal. So if we schedule, we're looking at phase two effective January 2028, then I think the question that I have a couple of questions for the rollout. And this is an original, Tom. I think we've talked about this as well. For the rollout, just that first 3 years, do we issue interim notice of compliance or waive notice of something for the categories 1 and 2 that clearly aren't the worst of the worst? We may not have the capacity to inspect them in the first 3 years, the full interior inspection in the first 3 years. So I'd love to talk about, whether, again, granting interim compliance or waiving in order to accommodate could make sense. And then the second question that I had is, if we're rolling phase 2 out beginning 2028, do we wait to start referring to code? I mean, we're gonna have I don't know how to gauge how many properties will end up in the lowest category and what impact it's gonna have on code capacity. Like, do we just do a year for phase 2 and then start those referrals to code 2029 to 2030? Like, that is kind of my what I'm throwing out.
I don't know, I guess I was thinking, as soon as something's in the lowest category, pass it on to get work done. If people. Right,
Mhm,
constituents want action,
mhm.
so, I don't know, my thought is just like, if you're
Make the.
in the lowest category, make the referral immediately, don't wait until you have the whole set.
Mhm. And that would give us a full, if we start that 2028. And we don't make the like full notice of compliance. Piece effective relative to the rent escrow remedy. Until January 2030, then we have 2028. Or the end of 2030, then we have 2 to 3 years to complete the first phase 3.
So there's two things,
Mhm.
and despite what I just said about certain student housing building. For properties that are like that, like let's say your checklist was basically, as Robert mentioned, that is the exiting there, is smoke and fire detection there, is the structure sound? Is there any evidence of like compromised primary
Mhm.
systems for help for safety?
Mhm.
For most of those properties, the answer is going to be it's fine. For just to pick on student housing, what you're going to see with them is like the structure's fine, but it's not being maintained. There's garbage all around the outside of the building. There's like furniture stacked up where it shouldn't be. There's what I would call nuisance violations, which again, the building code doesn't care about, but we do. So that's one place where I think you're gonna have to think about, do I want to waive it or do I want to enforce it? Because with them, it's just gonna be a matter of putting the paperwork in order, say, here's our paperwork. We're good to go, right? And it's like, well, no, because you got garbage all over your property all the time. So if you fix that, yeah.
Mhm.
But for the bad properties, or the frequent flyers, as we used to call them, they're probably in court already. And you're not gonna have a problem in establishing that they've had violations every year, so. It's like, how are you gonna? There's some landlords that would never be able to say it's in general conformance, and then it's like, what are you gonna do then? Because it boils down to,
Well, I
well,
mean,
then if the tenant doesn't have to pay, but, right, it's like,
That's the rent escrow remedy.
right, yeah.
but, I mean, as we met with,
But also with
for planning,
Right.
for the.
rubbish though and stuff, some of these are tenant created.
Right.
Oh,
And
absolutely, no, I
maintained
understand that.
nuisances.
I get
Right.
that, but
Well, I mean, that was our, when we were looking at I can't remember who was planning or finance, but when we had the like greater opportunities for Broome and all those folks in, when we were trying to figure out the HUD money, like the amount of damage from long-term tenants that have challenges can be enormous. I mean, we were looking at trying to figure out how to spend some of our HUD money to help assist with these known landlord issues. So there's also those pieces
Yeah,
in terms of like, how do we get to compliance?
Yeah, and I think we can, as we're developing the checklist and the categories, I think in terms of protocol, we can develop that process. I don't know that it needs to be outlined in the ordinance. And I think in those protocol conversations, we can acknowledge, I mean, because you both sort of were talking about the same thing, but you said long-term tenant
Yeah,
challenges. We also know it's very much a student thing.
yeah, there's
What
lots
is in
lots
the-
of categories. I was just referring to a specific
Yeah.
discussion we had where we were looking.
Right.
at
What
HUD
is
money.
in the ordinance though is that if a tenant is refusing, like if there's a component where the tenant is refusing entry, like it doesn't reflect negatively on the landlord. If there's I think that's what we can write legally, legislatively into the ordinance to capture, and then the protocol pieces we can hash out. If we do the rent escrow remedy is, and I'll just read it. So this would go into effect once the Once we've done that full first round, we've issued notices of compliance as a tenant protection, so not a penalty, but as a tenant protection. The rent escrow remedy states it would be unlawful for an owner to allow any unoccupied rental property to be occupied or to collect rent from a tenant for occupancy of a rental property during or for any time in which there is not a valid notice of proactive rental housing inspection program compliance. So if we're looking at a 2030 effective date for that, that gives the city time to develop that rent escrow protocol with a third-party financial institution, identify the rotations, deposits, distributions, and those timeframes.
I think I may have asked before, do we have an example of this functioning somewhere else?
You did ask, and we do, but I don't.
Can we, someone
Yeah.
flag that for me, figure it out? This, of all of this seems like, to me, like, sort of in some ways the heaviest lift for the city, and that we don't have anything, I don't think, quite like this functioning. Like the inspections are analogous to things we already do, the certificates of analogous things we already do, and this is like a lot of city involvement in a landlord tenant like financial transaction essentially. And I don't. I don't know that we have, you know, those, I don't know that we have those resources in place to do this sort of thing.
We
Certainly
don't
yet.
at the
And
moment. And that
it would
be,
it would need some consistent effort to do it by, even by 2030, I think that was.
so we definitely don't have the position, the protocol, or the resources yet. Corporation council's feedback relative to the landlord tenant back and forth, monitoring the time frame, because right now we've got a tenant paying their rent into that escrow account, and if it's not in compliance within 90 days, that amount goes back to the tenant and they continue to pay in so corporation council had a preference relative to changing that time frame and making it more of at end of tenancy thing, which still doesn't quite get at what we want this mechanism to do. But the idea of having it outlined as a remedy in the tenant protection section and noting the effective date 3 to 3.5 years out is to develop the structure to make it work. It's definitely functioning elsewhere, common enough to be recommended within the proactive approach. I just don't have the municipalities at the moment.
I apologize, I need to Canada.
That's okay.
I need to go,
Okay.
but very productive meeting, incredible amount of work that's gone in to this. And we will keep working away, right?
Are we adjourning?
Oh, I guess if I'm leaving.
Well, there's no quorum.
Right, okay, sorry.
You can
Then
continue
sure,
in
I
informational
will.
second.
No, that's
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, like, I'm just.
that's okay. Can we continue for a couple of minutes, just informational? There's one thing I want to make sure to touch on. Do you have a minute?
I have a minute.
Okay, and so because you mentioned incentives, you mentioned assistance. So if you remember, we did I introduced legislation in September relative to CDBG funding for a rehabilitation assistance program in relation to this proactive implementation. That is a $250,000 set aside. It does not need to be subject to the unspent amount now. We're in the middle of FY52. So could be considered in this year's CDBG budget exactly as it was introduced, a $250,000 set aside. Again, I mean, our initial conversations with Director Burling were that it could be functional. We would just need to work out the particulars. But in theory, it would be a it would be a fund that property owners could access, obviously after being vetted to ensure that they are accessing it in good faith, don't have present violations, they have a demonstrated history of not having violations, but they in good faith effort want to make the repairs. They don't have access to the capital to do so. So the city is partnering to provide that financial support. So that's my last piece that I want to make sure to get on record and in this conversation, just because CDAC is in the middle of discussing this year's FY52 CDBG budget. So I think that if we're talking about imminent rollout, that gives us another opportunity to demonstrate to the property owners that keep coming to us and saying that they're the good ones. You know, if the effort here is to support those who are providing decent housing and would like to continue to do so, it also prevents displacement based on those owners not having good intentions, but no access to the capital to make the repairs that are being requested.
That's a phase way down the line, or?
I mean, I think it's an opportunity. I mean, if it's adopted in FY52, it's not available until September 2027.
Right.
So I think
I only say that because
include
it sounds like a lot of particulars to work out just in terms of who would be eligible, because there's really a distinction between, especially if people are under LLC, like tracking down the financial eligibility of these landlords seems a bit tricky. I know we do it for other things.
Well,
but-
those were the things that Dr. Burling brought up, like it would take developing the protocol.
But
for
definitely like
things for it. But
in a vague way, it's a great thing to promote as part of, you know, like in the vaguest terms to tell people that that's the carrot. I love.
Motion
no,
to adjourn.
all right, meeting adjourned, thank you.
So a couple of comments off the record
Oh, you're still on the record.
Hold on one second.
information.
Robert, do you think you'll have,
By post? By when?
I want to send it as soon